in, and black can go queen to e6. I just bring my rook to f1, queen h6 next, and I believe the best that black can do is give up the queen for the bishop, and it's still going to be a huge attack with the extra material for white as the queen has infiltrated.
I just wanted to show that nice resource there for white. Although you have to bear in mind that black, unfortunately, is not obliged to capture. So when you are making these flashy moves, do consider whether it's actually a good move. And I'm not sure it is a good move if black says, you know what, I'm not budging. I'm not taking that rook.
I like it. I think the engine didn't change its evaluation. Queen g3 becomes an idea to put pressure on a loose pawn. So I know it's not this crushing attack by force. It's still a fun idea and worthy of exploring. So you are right that the opposite colored bishops do have some opportunities for white to go for the attack as your pieces are more coordinated. But the way Vidit is thinking here, I feel like he wants to win this game. Max Vormedam is the second lowest rated player in the field, and Vidit had the white pieces. He's drawn a bunch of games to this point. So queen takes e4, that's sending the game in a completely different direction because you are giving up this b4 pawn to take g5. And you mentioned sacrifice on f6. A bishop could land on f6 and similar concepts with a checkmating attack.
Yeah, wow. Well, you mentioned checkmate. We immediately have to dive in and look at this in a bit more detail, because what happens if first up, there's bishop takes pawn, but you should also calculate moves such as bishop to e7. And you have to stop with your calculation, but make assessments. And you have to say, does black have enough defensive resources? And bear in mind, like I mentioned earlier, there is divorce happening between the queen and the king. So this is often a sign for one side to attack.
Yes.
So let's work out. Bishop takes b4. I'm going to grab.
All right, and I will take on g5. The problem I'm having here is like finding the move by move for black, because I feel like if I make a careless choice, just like a quick move, I may pay the price. So I'm going to go rook e8 and see what happens. Okay.
Okay.
Didn't change.
Rook e8.
Didn't change.
Okay. I was going to advocate that we should be going for reconciliation between the queen and the king. And so I wanted to get her a little bit closer to the action. But rook e8, okay. What to do with white?
I feel like this is
queen
a very...
h4. It makes a lot of sense.
Wow, the engine is screaming at me every single turn. Look at that. Bishop g6. If it's not bishop g6, what does this engine want from me? I mean, this is the... Okay, now it says it's the right choice because I couldn't see the bishop going anywhere else. And I'm already thinking about this move.
Yeah, I was also thinking about rook f6. But, okay, the engine says... It doesn't go that much in black's favor, let's put it that way. But if bishop f6...
Well, I think either way, you just don't take it. I think black is going to play bishop f8 to reinforce this square. Yeah. So rook f6, I can still play bishop f8 and get ready to take this bishop on, this rook, on f6. So I take right away. What we were talking about earlier is a problem. Checkmate against this exposed king.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
He took on d6. He didn't want our fun lines.
But I don't know. This one is also pretty unpleasant for black. Even though the computer says objectively it is equal, there are resources to defend. I mean, just comparing the potential of the two bishops, the bishop on h5, it doesn't have a target. Black's bishop does have a target along this long diagonal. And I'm just going to count material because I forgot to do the most basic thing, which is count material. So black is currently a pawn up, not anymore. And I feel that unless black successfully manages to get a few trades in, I think it will be suffering central.
I'm with you. The more we kind of look at some of these variations, and just as I take in the position, the pawn structure here is annoying for black because you can protect your king with bishop g6, but your bishop isn't an active piece. Whereas on the flip side, bishop e7 or bishop f4 can put pressure on what is a loose pawn on d6. So the more time we spend in this position, the more I agree with you that the engine says zeros, and that can lead to some sort of bias from the commentators. I can think, oh, it's fine for black. But from a practical point of view, there's so many ideas for white. Queen h4, and if the bishop moves back, rook f3 to g3. All these attacking ideas, rook f6, we should keep in our mind as well. That was
Yeah.
a clever try by you. So I'm going to agree with you. I think that white has the fun here.
Yeah, white definitely has the capability for opening up lines against the black king. Okay, well, tricky position for Max Varmadam to handle there with the black pieces. Let's go back to the bird's eye view and yeah, and let's have a look at this beautiful sight of all 7 games in play, because we are going to go on a short break, and after we are going to catch up with all the excitement that is happening on the board. So don't go anywhere.
Can you beat Magnus Carlsen? Okay, yeah, probably not. But what if we give him a few distractions? Can you beat Magnus while he's cooking? What if he's playing football? How about Magnus skiing? Surely you can beat him sleeping. Now there's a Magnus for everyone. This month on chess.com.
What's the best way to follow any chess event, from the World Chess Championship to the candidates, the Speed Chess Championship, Title Tuesday, and so much more? Chess.com/events has all of the top chess tournaments played both over the board and online. Analyze and review games from the world's greatest players with live commentary, cloud analysis, Opening Explorer, and table bases. Find all the key event information, including schedules, prizes, results, news reports, player bios, tie breaks, and more. Even compete by voting for your predicted results. Explore chess.com/events today on web or with our iOS and Android apps and experience chess like never before.
We are back 2 hours into the start of round 5. Well, all action is happening. Seems like yet again we are going to be treated to another fiery round. But there you can see the bird's eye view, and let's take a recap of some of the games in progress. Robert, there we can see that there's been a lot of fun. I've got my eyes in the corners, in the middle of the board, and it seems like everything is interesting.
It's true. It makes our lives both easier and more difficult because we have so much more excitement and fun when we have rounds and tournaments like this, but then we don't know where to turn our heads. So I think that in the second from the right on the bottom, Parham Maksudlu against Ding Liren, that position is still fiery. The game in the top left between Ju Wen-jun and Alireza Firouzja, it's changed quite a lot since we left off. So, Ivanka, I'm sorry to do this. I'm just going to ask you to pick which game you most want to go to just because they're all looking so interesting to me.
Okay. Well, you kind of called it first. I want to hand to the Maksudlu Ding Liren game. It's not often that someone sacrifices a piece for just a pawn and lives to tell the tale. And let's have a look at how Maksudlu is getting on with his initiative.
What a game this has been. I have to say that there have been some fascinating moments. And you see the last move play was pawn to f6. So then that begs the question, what was White's move before that? Because Black just stopped the bishop from attacking the queen, but the bishop couldn't move anywhere. So if we just do some retracing of the player's steps, we saw the queen, came to g3 with check, kicking the king away from the knight. This was, well, the only reasonable move. Going up to h6 would have walked into a queen g5, so that would have been a problem. Knight d5, and now we see knight takes knight on d5, sacrificing the queen. But Ivanka, we were talking about a line like this earlier. It would not have been advisable to take this queen on e7. The three minor pieces versus queen and pawn dynamic, I do believe, favors the minors.
Yes, we quickly concluded, and I gave a word of caution that, when you're presented with such a choice and you can see how your three pieces coordinate, then do not hesitate. Give up the lady. And I agree. Definitely not one for Parham to have chosen. So instead, he decided just to continue playing with that piece and instead play pawn takes, which is good. He's going to recover material, right?
Yes. And he has done just that. f6, pawn takes, bishop takes, and now the action continues from a position with even material. But Ivanka, out of the corner of my eye, I spy a possible piece sacrifice, in this case an exchange sacrifice from Black. And as soon as he plays d4, I was thinking of rook g8, but that's why he played d4. I mean, the players are moving instantly at this stage because they are finding, in particular, Ding Liren, all of these exclamation point worthy moves. But rook g8 here would not have worked out the way you wanted to, because after the swap, there's queen d3 with check, a really, really important inclusion, and that's why the pawn went to d4, because otherwise Black would hit at the white king.
Yeah, and I love Ding's move there, offering a trade of queens and also just indicating that the pawn on d4 is a target. You know, if White were just simply to go queen takes queen, once the king recaptures, there's going to be a lot of pressure in the center. And I just want to also highlight the power of Ding's bishops. Just look how strong they are. D takes e5. Just say you play that move. You know, I know it opens even more lines. F takes e5. I mean, just look, you have a bishop bearing down on g2, another one on f2, and White's bishop is just so bad on h4.
And there are some funny lines here because f3 seems to shut down the bishop pair, but rook f4 taking advantage of the loose bishop. So there are all sorts of tactics at play here, Ivanka. And one other thing I wanted to note, in addition to what you're saying about the bishops, that I first wanted to take a step back because d4 was given a question mark. So I think it's important to show what better move was available because it seemed like a pretty natural move, shutting the bishop down, striking in the center against a pin pawn. And the advantage is in white's favor, according to the engines. And I'm going to look because I don't want to mislead anybody. It says that queen h3 or pawn f3 kept the advantage for white. Queen h3 makes a lot of sense to me, going for some vulnerable squares. But it's a position where many different choices seem to make sense, and assessing the correct one, not so easy.
But I mean, I was also instinctively drawn to f3, but I rejected it on account of the fact that the queen doesn't have too many squares, and I was worried about like some rook coming to g8, just actively sacrificing the rook. And after, I get it. I always miss these things, the counterattack. So I was thinking after queen h3, bishop d7, how is that queen coming out of the problem?
You were correct. No, you didn't miss it. That's the funny part, is it does seem like black is winning, because if you go bishop takes f6, trying to distract this queen, bishop takes h3, bishop takes queen, bishop d2 is mate. Yes. This bishop on a7 helps deliver a checkmate. So it's curious that the engine, after queen h3, instead of queen h3, it says that white is doing well here, but this queen is looking trapped to my, oh my gosh, queen f4. Are you kidding me? Oh, it's so easy to miss.
That was one of those poison squares. I had filtered that one out. But yeah, of course, queen f4. Wow. But that's so easy to miss in analysis as well, because, yeah, you just think that the queen, or you assume that the queen on g3 is going to get shut out if she goes to h3 or you play moves like f3. Wow.
Oh, come on. So d4, if we go back to the game, d4 makes perfect sense. I can justify it saying that this frees up the third rank for the white queen to escape, but it doesn't keep the pressure up. And if the queens come off the board, black's king, which has been the problem for Ding throughout this game, is no longer in danger, and I do prefer black's position thanks to the location of the bishops. The loose pawn on a4 is one that white will have to keep an eye out on, and if you try to avoid the queen trade with queen to d3, are we already talking about black going on the offensive in some of these positions with a move like f5? It's getting very double-edged.
Yeah. And as you've indicated, checkmate threatened on g2. Oh, goodness me. So what can Parham do to survive this? Because the computer at the minute says it's better for Ding, but it's not winning. But right. It does feel like make one mistake and Parham's position is going to fall apart, which once again, if this happens, it's just unfortunate for Parham. You know, he comes to the board, he wants to play fighting chess, he's had the opportunity for taking a repetition, he's declined it, and we've all like applauding because we're like, yay, great. And yet somehow the complications just haven't worked out in his favor.
Well, I think there's a reason for this in this particular game. So Parham, he uncorked a move that was given a brilliancy, right? The brilliant symbol, 2 exclamation points, right here on move 14, bishop to h4. So we applauded it. It was a really good decision. It allowed him to go forward for an attack. But the scorecard says that 4 exclamation points, 4 great moves from Ding in return. He has not had a piece sacrifice. He hasn't had the same brilliant move, but he has made all of the necessary defensive moves. Rook to h8. That was a great move from him. Then we saw white move the knight in, and black was able to stabilize because white made a few question marks. You see, Parham's made 2 of them to this point. So Parham may have made like the best move of all with bishop h4 piece sacrifice, but he wasn't able to follow it up accurately. And moves like h5, the king sliding over and then sacrificing the queen, all of these moves done with purpose from Ding Liren, finding accurate move after accurate move. Sure, you can argue some of those moves don't really deserve an exclamation point, sliding your king to the side, blocking an attack on your queen. But for me, it's all of them in conjunction with one another. I just love the purpose of Ding's moves. And if queen d3 check, I realized that he can just slide his queen up and trade those queens off. At long last, the black king will feel safe.
Yeah. And what a position. So what is the best move for white? I'm kind of struggling to find a good answer. I mean, is it moves to do with bishop d3 check? d5 will simply invite bishop takes pawn.
And that opens up the other bishop as well. These are difficult choices,
Exactly.
Ivanka. I would prefer black. I don't see an argument to change my mind about that. Perhaps, is there an opportunity to maybe trade on g7? And then in this endgame here, which looks like black is having some fun, maybe white can play f4 and it's getting complicated once again?
Yeah, that would be okay. But then that means white has to start igniting the position once more. I like this move, f4. It holds on to the balance, because if you make that silly move like pawn takes pawn, it just simplifies the position in black's favor. And here, okay, rook will come to e7, and suddenly it will be the black king suffering a death by bishop.
Just to show what you were indicating, that if white took, it's the white king that's in danger because of the bishop. So one little pawn exchange, the incorrect one, can turn the tables completely in a position, and especially because white's bishops are loose and there's a pawn on a4 hanging. So I would argue this is a really challenging position for Parham, that even if he trades queens and after the queen shot plays f4, black can play d5 and try to play e4, and we have a protected pass pawn in the center. White's extra pawn, let's put that in air quotes because we have 7 pawns per side, but black has an extra pawn on the e file, white has an extra pawn on the g file, but it's black's pawn establishing its presence first. I would take the black side.
I would also take the black side as well. Oh, Parham, he needs to find some accurate moves in this particular position. Well, we will see whether he manages to do so, because I think it's time to head to the bird's eye view and take a look at one of the other games. And my eye is drawn to the one on the top left between Zhu Wenjun and Alireza Firouzja, because I see that there's a black pawn on e2 all by itself. That cannot be long for the world. And also, we've come at a time. Have we come at a time where there you see it? A double question mark has been awarded, and I'm also looking at the evaluation bar, and it's all the way in white's favor.
We came at the perfect moment, because if we just go back a couple moves, the blunder has just happened. It's been, I often say mistakes come in pairs. Blunder, 2 moves in a row from Firouzja. He's playing for a win. We know that given the rating difference between these two. But let's just go back. The move played was pawn to e2, which gave white the upper hand. And in fact, here, white probably should have played pawn to g4, just kicking the bishop, no longer protecting his pawn on e2. I'm guessing that Alireza wanted Zhu Wenjun to play g4 just to make her king feel a little less safe, but white is clearly having the upper hand in all of these positions. This is a favorable endgame with a healthier pawn structure. So e2 was a move played because there was a pin along the e-file and maybe trying to create some imbalances in the position. It was the wrong choice, but even worse, Ivanka, after white made an inaccuracy, it's a miss here with knight to f3. g4 was better, but we see the point. Trying to just trade pieces and get e2, queen f7. Ivanka, what do you see that white can capitalize on?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I'm thinking Could it be something to do with knight to e5 and then g4?
That looks really good. Looks really strong for white. I think you have a choice. Knight g5. Also, I think forces queen g6, right?
Yes, unless there's some bishop counterattacking bishop g6.
But then I can even just take on e2, and this is a dream.
Yeah, that is a dream. Okay, that was a big X by me. So yeah. Okay, so you have to go queen takes.
What? But queen g6, can't we just trade queens? And you can't take the pawn because g4 traps your bishop. I'm just going to quickly show that. This is why pieces on the rim are considered dim. And if you take with the bishop, we once again can just take this pawn, and the pawn structure is simply better for white. These are double pawns. The knight can hop into e6 and go after some of these weaknesses. It also can hop back. Ivanka, I think we are seeing the makings of a position where Zhu and Jun can play with zero risk for a win.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see the risk at all. I mean, is this the only line that guarantees her an advantage?
Let's see, because knight e5, I think, also makes
Knight
perfect
e5
sense.
is also looks tempting. Oh, the evaluation bar goes down. Okay, maybe this one carries a lot more risk.
I guess because the pawn on e2 survives. Yeah, if you bring this queen, I'm not sure where, but even a square like f4, g4 feels a lot less tempting with the black queen
rook
in front of the
f8.
king. Oh, and suddenly the tables
Did you
turn.
have no, but then yes. Okay. So that's an important point to mention, that rook f8 is threatened, and yeah. Okay, but knight g5, it's on the board.
Yes, Ju and Jun does not miss her opportunity here. And from Alireza Firouzja, I wonder if he saw knight e5, but maybe forgot about knight g5. But the look on his face is of a player who is really upset with the position that he has. And Ju and Jun, I mean, this is a position where you just play for a win, and I think her moves are actually not so difficult. It's not already won. So I want to stress that. The black can potentially survive playing all the best moves, but playing all the best moves in this position from the black side, at least engine-approved moves, that's going to be immensely challenging.
Yeah, and it's also very difficult for Alireza because he has to just accept that his dream of pushing for an advantage is over. He needs to grovel for that draw because you have to trade off queens in order to prevent queen takes h7.
This looks terrible.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find any idea besides queen g6 or bishop g6 may lead to the same place. But just to reiterate our point here is that white is having 100% of the fun. This rook is about to slam down an e7, which picks up at least one pawn with the knight jumping into e6. If you kick the knight with pawn to h6, the knight can hop back to f3 and up to e5, where it hits the bishop and this vulnerable pawn here, and the white king will dart to e3. So the one weakness we talked about so long ago at this stage, Ivanka, is protected by the king, which frees up the rook to go in either direction. Wow, what an advantage for white.
Yeah. No, totally. And yeah, I mean, the only counterplay that I can see for black, and is just, I'm thinking in purely defensive terms, is obviously to put the rook on b8 and then try to advance the a pawn. Or maybe first go a5, a4, then rook b8, and just keep the rook on e2 honest. But it is not a plan of activity. It's just a plan of trying to hold the position. And as we know, Ju and Jun, she is a fabulous endgame player.
And this isn't any old endgame. It's not like she's pushing pawns slowly. It's just her moves are going to be much simpler than Alireza Firouzja. So he's probably staring at this position and wondering, what did I do? I was getting a little bit too active. And for Ju and Jun, a smart play from her. She sensed her opponent was playing for result rather than always playing the board. And when you're playing for result, It's when you make mistakes. That's not chess. Chess is objective. You always have to remain objective. And I think that Ji Won-jun's trying to find her best choices. And for Alireza, I have to imagine in the back of his head, he's looking, okay, how do I win? How do I keep pace with the Nishikiri? She's lower rated. Let me strive for that victory. And she's a grandmaster. She's the 4-time women's world champion. She's not just going to allow you to win a game just because you want to.
Yeah, she's no pushover. Absolutely. If I were in Alireza's shoes, I'm just thinking, bishop g6, queen g6, which is the best way to even survive? Because if you go bishop g6, then your move queen takes e2 just looked devastating. And is there any checkmate? So, for instance, if the queen comes to f4, there's no back rank checkmate, thankfully.
Nope, because the bishop covers that square.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Ivanka, like, let's say I don't want to tempt fate. I don't want to leave your queen on the board. If I go queen e3, is it still a huge advantage for white. So even if I play the simple queen up, protecting the one pawn that was hanging, I'm forcing the queens off no matter where you go, and the advantage is clear.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for Alireza, the queen's coming off is going to be a disaster. There's just no way that he can do anything other than try to grovel. But if he keeps the queen on, maybe he has some hopes to do something at least. So I'm thinking maybe queen h4.
Am I trapping your queen? Or maybe g3 is a little over ambitious because you have queen h5 or h6. But what if I just start making forward moves?
Yeah, king h8.
My pawn and my rook are hanging, so I'm going to take care of both at once with a retreating. It's been a theme of the day, right? Retreating knight moves.
Retreat the knight, and oh my goodness me, it'll be 2 pawns to the good, but at least the queens are on the board.
We count our very, very, very small blessings when we have them, but everything is falling apart here for Firouzja. So, this could be a huge upset from Ji Won-jun. I always like to stress that in an individual game, of course, a grandmaster can take down one of the highest rated grandmasters in the world, but for Ji Won-jun, she's bringing the challenge. She started with c4 early on, saying, I don't want just a peaceful affair. I'm not playing for a draw, so to speak. And now she will be very upset with the draw, given the advantage she has.
Yeah, no, I suspect that she will win this game. I think her position is so good, and she's a fantastic player. Her rating right now doesn't reflect her true quality or her skill. It's just more of the sign of the times. Unfortunately, everyone has been losing rating points mainly because of underrated juniors. Come and steal your points. I remember a few years ago that Gukesh, Pragnananda were there with 1,800, or was it 2,200 ratings?
You're like, I don't think that's accurate. When there was the World Rapid Championship where Gukesh was 2,000 in Rapid and like 2,650 or whatever in Classical. Yeah. And you're like, I don't think that one's accurate. But we see this very regularly, especially actually from China and India. Lots of underrated junior players whose rating has yet to catch up with their strength.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I always say that if you're going to play a tournament in India, you should be prepared to make a rating donation. It's a tough crowd there. And, well, what can I say? But let's go. So Alireza Firouzja in big trouble. But let's go back to the drawing board, to the bird's eye view, where we can take a look at some of the other games in progress. And okay, maybe we can revisit. I'm trying to sniff out the complications. What is happening in the game between Gukesh and Nepomniachtchi?
Yeah, we can go there. Every game is looking like it has a lot of life left in it. So why don't we go back to Gukesh and Jan Nepomniachtchi. I'm also looking afterwards, maybe Abdusattorov and Wei Yi. We haven't been in that game for a long time, but that one has changed quite a bit. So let's go to Gukesh as he takes on Nepomniachtchi. And we see it's Nepo on the turn. White has kept the extra pawn. The knights are connected with one another. Both pawns are defended. Jovanka, we were talking about how black had compensation, counterplay, all that good stuff. Are you starting to feel like white is actually controlling the board in a much more natural way?
Yes. Well, Gukesh managed to keep that extra pawn, so that was something of note. But his pieces are very cramped. They're very solid, but cramped. And if black says, I don't need to do anything, so say, for instance, makes a pass move, I was going to say king h8. And then what is white's plan? To go knight to d4?
Yes.
Yeah, must be to go knight to d4. But then you know what's going to happen after bishop takes knight. You're going to take with the pawn, and yeah, that's going to be much better for white, because after all, white is still a pawn to the good. So let's take that one back and not make a passive move such as king h8, and instead, but I cannot stop it.
No.
I cannot stop knight to d4. Unless you're
No.
doing those weird and wonderful rook b4 moves that's sometimes seen, but I feel that that's too much.
Knight d4 still. I think that you can almost pre-move knight to d4, because any swap on d4 is favorable for white, as black is relying on the bishop pair. But when you only have one bishop, look at these dark squares. I can see a future where a knight gets to c5, and you can't easily increase the pressure because you can double rooks on the b file going after this pawn. But white has the very simple b3, knight a4. Now that the square is protected, c6 is loose. White controls the square in front of it. This is miserable for black.
Yeah, totally miserable. No, you don't. No. Okay, what happens if black doesn't panic when the knight reaches d4, but instead has the answer bishop to d7?
Okay, so let's say we.
But that means I still have to. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of rook b4. I feel like it's a step in the wrong direction. Actually, I know what I've been thinking. This is one of those things. This is one of those positions where you need time to process, like what one should be doing. And I'm thinking that maybe the queen is misplaced on a5. It needs to be maybe even on squares such as, we have, did you put that down, bishop g6?
I didn't touch the board at all. It was Jan Nepomniachtchi
Okay.
back to g6.
Well, I was going to suggest moving the queen, relocating it to, I was thinking even d8 in order to drop the bishop back to d7. But, okay, a prophylaxis move there from Nepomniachtchi. He's saying, okay, knight d4 can come, but then the knight will be chased.
I hate this position for
I
black.
don't. But knight d4 is coming.
Yeah, and I think he's going to have to play.
How is Gukesh defending? Sorry,
I think that
he's defending.
I think he has to just bring a rook to defend the pawn. But my big concern, if I think of the ideas in this position, if white can successfully play b3 and knight a4, we're already talking about a position that strategically is on the verge of collapsing for black. And I'm just going to put a couple moves on the board just so we can see what that looks like. Let's say I preemptively defend, the knight comes to a4. I control the c5 square. I'm putting pressure down on c6. And if you make some kind of careless move, like, I don't even know, rook e8, something like this, you already see the advantage going sky high because the knight gets into d4. You're not pushing your pawn. I have that square under my control. As we keep talking about, any time black takes on d4, white is thrilled to just take back. You are not worried about your queenside pawns anymore. In fact, it's an extra pawn that you can start thinking about actually mobilizing. So, Ivanka, there might be a way for black to keep holding on. Just doesn't look easy.
It's certainly not easy, and I love your move of b3. I'm really struggling to even come up with an idea. The knight d4 played, and once again, black has to defend the c6 pawn. He cannot advance the pawn, because if you step forward with the pawn to c5, yes, it attacks the knight, but the knight can then move to, say, for instance, b3, and then the d5 pawn is dropping.
Everything
or maybe
falls.
knight c6 is falling as well. So, hello. Why win one pawn when you can win a rook?
I think the overall point, though, is that these pawns need to be connected, because as soon as you push the pawns, they become hanging pawns, which is the name of the pawn structure when you have pawns c5 and d5. But here, they will be hanging, because even knight to b3, hitting both of them at the same time, the pawns will just simply fall. So I think that Jan has to make some kind of rook move, but then you're using a 5-point piece to defend a 1-point piece. You're kind of not in the ideal setup. And I think that for Gukesh, the big question is, can you play b3 and knight a4? Because if you can play that, you go for it. You have a strategically awesome position. I am a little worried about rushing b3, because c5 at some moment could hit both knights in a row, though that looks very loose. And even if the knight retreats back to e2, we have everything protected, and d5 still is a problem. I like white.
Yeah, knight a4 is still coming black's way. No, I also like white. I think it's a great position for Gukesh. It's a dream come true. You know, he's lost 2 games in a row. What better thing to have than a very stable advantage? And the 2 knights are working so well against black's 2 bishops.
Dark square domination. The light square bishop is staring into thin air, and perhaps that's why the bishop should have rerouted to d7, just to protect the c6 pawn. But white's plan looks very easy. There's no risk whatsoever. Your king is safe. It's an extra pawn, and it's starting to really feel like an extra pawn, and the compensation does not feel like it is enough.
Yeah, rook a6 indeed played by Jan. Okay. Gukesh looking like he's in full control there with some excellent moves. Whilst this game is, the players are pausing, maybe we can go back to the bird's eye view and have a look at what is happening elsewhere.
Let's do it, because so many of these battles are heating up. I see the Wei Yi game still interesting to my eyes in the bottom right. The advantage is actually in Abdusatarov's favor with the white pieces. So do you think we should head to that one, or any other game?
Yeah. I was thinking that we should also pop in our marquee matchup between Pragnanda, man of the moment, and Anish Giri, tournament leader. But
actually, Ivanka, can we quickly go to Ding Liren versus Parham Magsudlu? Because I'm not sure if I'm seeing this correctly. There could be a potential for some repetition. So I just want to catch that game before it potentially concludes. I just want to make sure my eyes aren't deceiving me, as I saw a rook on g6 for Parham, and I see a bunch of checks against this king, and I'm not quite sure how it escapes.
Okay, let's check that one out. And first up, can we quickly retrace the steps?
Let's do it. Okay, so queen g7, bishop d3 check was played, and that the king went back. The rook came to e3, so still aggressive play from Parham, even though the queens were coming off.
Okay. And you were spot on there, Robert, with it ending in a draw. And there you can see the repetition with the rook checking the black king. And that means Parham moves on to 1 point out of 5, and Ding Liren, he is on 50% with 2.5 points out of 5. What a game, though. First up with Parham boldly sacrificing a piece, some accurate defense there by Ding, and in the end, just a well-played tussle.
Not all 31 move draws are the same. This game was full of tactical flair. Ding Liren, he played what seemed like perfect defense, considering the sacrifice of a knight. The Black King was exposed in some danger, and as you see the playing hall, that board is now empty. There's a challenger section and the masters, but if we just rewind and show those, or instant replay, actually, those final moments of the Parham and Ding game, we just want to show you why this game concluded as a draw. The rook went back and forth. If the king tried to escape to e7, you're walking into the line of fire. There is a bishop on h4 that is inadvisable. If you run to e8, thinking you're getting away, the rook comes to e1 with check, and the Black King is actually getting checkmated. King d7, bishop f5, check, forcing you back to d8, and now I can take your rook on f8 with double check, and it's actually checkmate. The Black King has nowhere to go. So Ding could not run away in either direction, as if he instead tried to run to the h file, let's say king to h8 here, you see that white is winning by another checkmate, check, and checkmate thanks to this bishop on h4 covering f6, this bishop on d3 protecting the rook, and all of these squares are under white's control. So the king could not escape.
Yeah, wow. What an end there. I really like those checkmating ideas, especially the one that we have on the board. That was a beautiful, beautiful checkmate. Well, we have our very first result of round 5, and we are going to take it to a short break because coming up, you are not going to be wanting to miss all the action that will be coming our way. So see you in a few minutes.
Chess Kid is going live and in person at the Chess Kid National Festival. Bring the whole family. Meet your favorite chess masters. Solve puzzles. Play K8 tournaments. Compete for the Chess Kid Festival Championship title, and so much more. This festival is surely one for the books. From February 16th to the 19th, 2024 in Charlotte, North Carolina. Book your seats now before they're gone.
I'm International Master Alex Banza, and I'll be presenting you Silman's complete endgame course from beginner to master. Besides what you will see from Mr. Silman, I'm gonna try to do my best and share with you some of the insights that I managed to steal from my coach. Trust me, you have never really imagined something like this could be compared to chess. You will notice that the difficulty of these positions will kind of increase exponentially as long as we progress with the series. Let the games begin. Knight takes on a3, bishop takes on a3, knight b5, targeting your bishop, targeting the pawn. You have to keep the bishop on the diagonal. Knight takes on c3, defending my pawn. Knight e2, but after the stunning knight to b1, threatening pawn to a3, pawn to c3, threatening b2, threatening a2. There is just no way to stop. Improve your endgames and start crushing your opponents with this very evil playstyle.
Hello and welcome back to round 5 of Tata Steel Masters, and there is one player in the sole lead, and that is Anish Giri. But let's have a look at his event win probability. Now, he started the event with a 9.3% chance of winning, but it wasn't always that way, because suddenly round 2 is gone up after his draw to Vidit, and by the end, look at that, just before this round, 34% chance of winning the event. Robert, what do we make of that?
When you're winning games and you're in the sole lead, the estimations, prognostications tend to favor you, and I actually think that 9.3% to start with, he's one of the higher rated players in the field. But Anish Giri, he rises to the occasion in Vaikanze. Last year was the first time he won the event, but he's been oh so close on numerous occasions. Earlier, we showed the tiebreak match against Jordan van Forest. He also tied for first, I believe, with Magnus Carlsen one year. He got 9 out of 13. Like, he's been a star. He's been on a torrid pace in Vaikanze. It's probably his best event overall. And in this year, in this tournament, he's in the lead, but Praggnanandhaa, the player we see on the screen here, just overtook Vishyanan for the number 1 rated player in India. He would like to catch up to Anish Giri on the leaderboard in Vaikanze.
He certainly would. Praggnanandhaa, one of 4 players on 2.5 points. And also, look at Praggnanandhaa there. He just 18 years old, and he certainly looks like he is in full focus mode. So there we can see the position on the right. Maybe we can dive in and have a look at, first of all, what happened, and secondly, how is Prag doing?
Okay, let's first of all take stock of what's currently happening. Even material. So it's queen, knight, rook, and 6 pawns per side. And I like the glyphs and the story arc we have here. You see that Prag, he's not given any exclamation points, no question marks, but Anish has been given 2 moves that earned an exclamation point, and that's because his position's been more difficult to play. So he's had to find some challenging moves along the way just to ensure that he wouldn't be in a much worse spot. I personally gave one of Praggnanandhaa's moves an exclamation point. So in the Robert Hess game review feedback, Prag has earned an exclamation point. But in Chess.com's system here, none of the moves stood out in that way. But for Anish, he found some only moves to keep the balance.
Yes, I think on the human scale, Praggnanandhaa has earned quite a few exclamation points. But yeah, the machine, well, that is a little bit more objective. And we see, a very classy move, Rook C2, with the intention, and it's a double fold intention, Queen C1 perhaps, taking control of the C line, or even maybe Rook to D2 and applying pressure on the D5 square.
This is really interesting position because material, I counted, it's even. The pawns aren't on the same files. There's some weaknesses for both sides. The D5 pawn, the C file control is good for white, but the A5 pawn, that's a bad pawn. So at some moment, you have to be very careful, as Anish may walk his rook up the board and grab that pawn. But before we dive into the X's and O's here, maybe we should take a step back, rewind, and see how we got to this stage, because Ivanka, we were talking about how cramped Black's position was. This position looks anything but cramped. It actually looks like Black has a lot of space. So if we go back to move B4, the queen went up. We saw the knight reroute to C1. And here, instead of that B3 push, Rook C8 was played. And after knight B3, C5. What did you make of this decision from Anish?
Yeah, well, it was forced to play C5 because otherwise Prag was establishing just a grip onto the C5 square with Rook to C1. So it was now or never for Anish. So Anish just decided, okay, roll the dice, come what may, let's advance.
And he didn't have to sacrifice a pawn because tactically speaking, the B4 pawn is defended. Pawn C5, knight takes, queen takes B4. It looks like a free pawn, but it's actually a blunder because there's rook to B8 hitting the queen and the knight behind it, as the knight on c5 is defended, unlike the knight on b3. So I just wanted to show that Anish had everything under control. And we saw some trades, Ivanka. And okay, now we got to this position. It still looks very pleasant for white.
Yes, it does look very pleasant for white, but at least black has the control over the c line. So now the b pawn needs to be looked after. So how did Anish, did he retreat his queen to d6?
He did just that. The white knight hopped in. The knight gets kicked, and the knight goes to d3, staring at that pawn that you mentioned, and the c5 square. I like the way both players handle it thus far. It seems like white is better, and Anish plays e5. So I have to say I also really like that move, that he is being attacked on the flank. His weak pawn over there, he is striking in the center. So is the b4 pawn capturable? That's the essential question. I think rook c4 tactics, that was the saving idea for Anish.
Yes, and also this e5 pawn is very clever, because if Prague did capture the pawn with the queen, then the queens could get traded, and then the knight would be hassled by rook on b8.
And as you're indicating, an e4 type of move. So black is really holding on for dear life, but in a great way. And we saw a swap on e5, and b4 once again is hanging, but just like we talked about, rook b8 at the end probably scared him off. And so rook c1, trade, e4 I thought was going to be played, but instead of rook to b8, and there we see one of the exclamation points. I now forgot that the b4 pawn was actually hanging, so rook b8 first was important, and I was so tempted to kick the knight away, but no, you have to take precaution. You don't want to hang your pawns.
Yeah, and this is where we see Prague come up with a very subtle move of dropping the queen back at some stage.
The queen went back to d1. The black knight hops out. Rook c2 and king h7. Prophylaxis from Anish Giri.
Yeah, okay. And question time for Prague. How's he going to continue? Because you pinpointed that black's rook can advance up to b5, targeting a5. And the rook is not only very active there, but it also defends the d5 pawn.
Oh, so it's defensive and aggressive at the same time. Sorry, go ahead, Ivanka.
No, so this means it's a serious threat. So presumably, Prague's very sophisticated rook c2 move was designed to fight against rook b5, because then he could play queen c1 and, come with rook c6, and the queen and the knight would be attacked. But king h7 says that Anish Giri is going, I'm on form. I've anticipated what you're planning, and I'm taking steps against it. And Prague about to make a move.
And he hasn't done it yet. I'm looking at his clock, by the way. He's down to 11 minutes, now almost 12 minutes after gaining the 30-second increment, and he hops his knight into c5. So this knight is on a good square. Watch out for knight e4 ideas, making use of a pin on the d-file. So there are still tactics in the air in this game.
Yeah, and knight c5, what a move. The knight's not entirely stable there. I'm just thinking, well, what is going to be the response if we take it on a move-by-move basis and go first up, rook to b5, and just to kind of hone in on your point, moves like rook c8 is really bad because of knight to e4, and suddenly the queen and the rook are on freeze.
And once you trade those rooks off the board, that d5 pawn is no longer on the board. White is a pawn ahead with the safer king and a beautiful knight on e4 defending f2, and also can leap into the position from pretty much any point, an octopus knight. So this is a great position for Prague, and it's confusing for black after knight c5. It's just the start of its journey. Not easy to make a move in response for Anish.
Yeah, I'm just thinking rook b5. If you can manage rook b5, stick to the same plan.
So there's
Is
one bit of
Prague's
good
idea
news.
maybe? Yeah.
I was going to say the a5 pawn isn't hanging because there's knight to b7 in these positions. So a move like queen c1 becomes possible.
That is true. But I'm also reminded that the knight on c5 is not entirely stable. So I was just thinking about moves such as b3 or even d4.
That's a good point. That's well taken. And by the way, knight h4 is not out of the question. And you keep mentioning with a very real purpose that when the queen and king are offside like this, a counterattack can be devastating.
Yes, totally. I mean, that's actually a really good point. It's quite funny actually how sometimes one lives by these rules and has all these expressions so that you can remember these rules, but then you forget about them. But nicely pointed out there, knight h4 is a possibility, just generating an attack against the white king. Now the queen is so far away. Rook b5 played.
Anish,
And
taking your advice. By the way, do you think he's using the clock as a weapon here? Because Prague has to essentially play a move every minute.
Sorry, I got distracted by the camera view. Did you see the way that Anish tilted his head?
Yeah.
And he's coming back. No, I mean, Anish is a fast player. Whenever I've done commentary, Anish is always walking around, pacing, thinking, and yeah, he's just plays very quickly, got good instincts. But I also, going back to the position, wonder whether Prague's plan is to play knight to b3, or is that just too passive? Oh, and there it comes.
Well, yeah, you call it just simple retreating move is sometimes the best recipe for success because the knight blockades that b pawn that you were saying maybe you can throw it forward, not anymore, protects the a5 pawn, and suddenly queen d3 stares in both directions. That is a lot to figure out for Anish because his king on h7 does feel less safe than the white king on g1.
It does feel less safe, and also white has control of the only open line on the board. The next move is going to be queen c1, rook c6, then the queen will step up to c2, and questions will be asked of the knight on g6. And let's not also forget that the rook can go to c7 and go pawn hunting.
This rook could also go to c8 and try to go for some kind of checkmates on the last rank. I feel like white has so many more options. And if that's the case, at some point I could see Anish trying to lash out with a move like d4, trying to create some counterplay and some control.
Yeah, no, I completely see that as a possibility. Yeah, d4, I was thinking that, and after pawn takes to go e4. And again, just to use the e-pawn to open up lines, swing. Okay. For a second, I got excited. I was like, did that happen?
No, I'm making moves.
Swing over to g5 with a potential knight f4, knight h4. Okay, obviously, it has to be well timed.
Well, I think that in a position like this, not having that much time would hurt Prague. So d4, pawn takes d4. I was wondering, can I even just take back with the pawn on d4? Because your knight is overloaded protecting the a5 pawn, so you can't just scoop up d4. I would trade queens on d4 if you take them that way. That's not the end of the story. There still will be some plans. Oh, I blundered apparently. What did I blunder? This must be some winning tactic.
Rook d5. Rook d5, and then it's back rank mate.
It's that simple. So I admit it, didn't see it, but it's good to point out that the queen covers h2. So that's a checkmate down here. But what I was going to say was, if we can humor me for a second, that in positions like this, even though the eval bar says, oh, it's just equal, with extra pawns on different sides of the board, black with 2 pawns here, white with an extra pawn on the f-file, a rook coming to 7th rank, both sides would actually have chances to even win a position like this, despite the level material. So that's what I was trying to get at, but I blundered a back rank checkmate. that's okay. As a commentator, it's not my game. I don't lose if there's a checkmate on the board. I can just explain.
Yeah, totally. Totally agree with that. And my point was going to be about like d4 being well timed. Like, for instance, it might be a good idea to initiate this counterplay once the white rook has made its excursions along the c line. So if it finds itself on c8, then I can imagine that d4 would come with a lot more power, because the black pawn just simply can't be corralled like it would do if the rook was on c2. But then it begs the question is that Anish needs to find a good waiting yet productive move. And, well, we are not going to wait for long, because rook to b8. Oh, is that a silent draw offer saying, if you put your knight back on c5, I will be putting my rook back on b5, and let's repeat?
I haven't had this said to me, since like high school. You wish, right? It's like, when people just say, oh, do you want to, can we eat this for dinner? You wish, right? Just throwing it right back at you. I think that Anish Giri would dream of a draw at this stage, because Prague has the complete control of the open file, has the healthier king, has a good pawn structure. So knight c5, I don't see Prague going back and forth to make that draw. And for Anish, I think it actually was a very clever response, because rook d2 is the move that catches my eye going right after this pawn on d5, and maybe the black rook can either go to d8 or back to b5 to defend. And for white, you want to attack the d5 pawn, but keep your rook on the open c file. You can't get everything that you'd like. Rook c5 is going to be an option as well, but rook d8 does protect that pawn, and d4 is happening next.
Yeah, I suspect that Prague will either play rook c5, or he will line up the queen and the rook. And there, Prague returns to the board under 10 minutes. How many moves have they played? They are move 30. So not serious time trouble for Prague.
No. I guess if it gets complicated, then you're regretting having less than 10 minutes. But until something really happens, he has such control that it's not too big a deal.
Yep. Okay. And whilst Prague is considering how he is going to maximize his position, let's go to the bird's eye view and have a look at some of the other games. And shall we quickly revisit a game that we haven't checked in on, the game between Abdusattorov and Wei Yi? It's there in the bottom right.
Let's do it. And we see that a move was just played as soon as we went to the position, and it looks like Wei Yi is readying his reply. So we can bring that board up for you. Some trades. Just to go back, these two moves, the bishop took a pawn on e5, the knight took a pawn on e4. So material, it remains even, but we see a bishop versus a knight, a pass pawn in the center for white, whereas black has an extra pawn on the queen side that has not mobilized yet. First glance, huge advantage for white in my eyes, but I look at the eval bar saying, well, not so fast. Black has things under control for now, and we see the scorecard. Wei Yi has made some exclamation point worthy moves because he's been on defensive. He's finding these only moves that are keeping him in the game.
Yes, and he will have to continue to find those only moves to remain in the game, because the first point of call will be to check on c8, and upon which I think the only it's asking. It feels like I'm asking too much of the black position if the king steps up to f7.
Risky.
At first, I thought that queen h, because queen h8. But I see the evaluation bar staunchly in the middle, and I'm thinking, really, black can survive this?
It's actually amazing that this is just fine for black. Queen h4 comes to mind. Oh, but it's queen g7 check. That looks completely unappealing. So I wouldn't be doing that. Wait, then what? looks like I'm just going to put it on the board to see how much the evaluation bar hates it. It says white is completely winning. You can deliver this check, maybe even push this pawn to d6 because there is no perpetual check as the bishop on e5 covers this exposed diagonal, which means that any check on e1 is safely met by king h2.
Okay. Yeah, so that didn't look good. But then why is the evaluation bar saying that after queen h8, black is, it's okay?
I wish I had all the answers. Let's see. Knight g5 does not look right. Even h4 there kicks the knight away, and h7 falls with check. That won't work.
I mean, could it be something as elementary like knight f6 and then the queen ending is not a draw because the queen is well placed on f6? Well, that is a huge... I mean, you really have to get over every psychological block in order to make a move like knight f6.
Yeah, because you're giving up a pawn with check, and yet because there's this check here and back to f4, the dark square control is so important to white that you don't even want to give up your bishop, even if it includes winning a pawn. So that's an amazing sequence, but the white king does not have true shelter. Queen a1 can pick up this a4 pawn in some lines. Queen f1 to f4 looks like an immediate draw. So, wow, that is quite a save. So that's why Nodirbek hasn't moved just yet. But queen c8 to h8, it looks very scary. Perhaps Veyi can use a process of elimination to figure out this knight f6 move holds.
Yeah, but it's not forced to step up with the king to f7. To my eye, I would not go that direction. I was thinking that the queen could block with f8.
Right.
But
then I was just going to...
Then again, it looks terrible, right? You just... Queen c7, complete control.
But queen f8 feels like a very human response. You block a check with your queen, get your queen onto the open line. But yeah, the queen on c7 with the bishop on e5, the king on g8 exposed, the white king safe and sound. So this is a very critical moment for Nodirbek Abdusattorov, who's well ahead on the clock. Veyi has experienced some time trouble difficulties throughout this event. We're only into the fifth round, but I remember some games where he just didn't have enough time to calculate, including that game against Gukesh where things got out of hand. So move 34 is coming up for white. I feel like you want to use the clock as a weapon here for white.
Yeah, and Nodirbek, he's just taking his time. He's working out all the accurate possibilities because it's not the only move to give a check. You can also step forward with the queen to d4, attack the knight, and try to bully the d pawn through to d6. But queen c8, very, very tempting.
In bullet, you play queen c8 immediately, and as soon as
it's happened.
He goes for it, but queen d4 also looked like a good try. So queen c8 check, but he doesn't respond yet. This is a critical moment for him. If he plays queen f8, it appears he loses the threat of the game. If he finds king f7, queen h8, and then knight f6, I mean, what a difficult defense. If he finds that, he really deserves a half point. That's incredible.
That is an incredible resource. And just 6 minutes on the clock. I mean, such a difficult scenario here for Weyi. King f7, queen h8. So far, so good. And what do you think, Robert? Do you think he will play it?
I'm just looking at the clock, looking at the board. I think he will play king f7. Allowing the queen on the 7th rank looks very scary. Not that allowing a queen on h8 isn't worrisome either, but you can tell the way he's staring at this position. He's locked in. He realizes he may have a tightrope to walk, and king f7, the only way here for the Chinese super grandmaster. If he plays queen to f8, which is the only other move that doesn't lose the game on the spot, the white queen just simply slides back attacks pawn